I did not know I was walking into my own wedding. The invitation said birthday party. Nothing more. Madison Hayes had been my best friend since college, and when the daughter of one of the richest families in Chicago invited you to a celebration at the Hayes estate, you showed up, smiled, and tried not to spill anything on the expensive furniture. That was my entire plan. I spent 40 minutes choosing a dress I could barely afford, and another 20 convincing myself I belonged there. By the time my rideshare pulled through the gates, I already felt out of place. The estate looked less like a home, and more like something from a movie. Stone pathways curved through perfectly maintained gardens. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Light spilled from towering windows onto the lawn. Everything glowed. Everything looked impossibly expensive. I stepped out of the car and immediately regretted coming. Men in tailored suits stood beside women wearing jewelry worth more than my yearly salary. A string quartet played somewhere inside. Waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress and reminded myself that I was here for Madison. Nothing else. The moment I entered the mansion, something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Just strange. Conversations seemed to pause as I walked through the grand entrance hall. People looked at me. Not casually. Deliberately. Their expressions were difficult to read. Curious. Interested. Expectant. I searched the room for Madison, hoping she would rescue me from whatever was happening. Instead, my eyes landed on someone else. Nathaniel Hayes. Even before I knew him personally, everyone in Chicago knew his name. Billionaire CEO. Business genius. The man behind one of the largest companies in the country. He stood near the far end of the ballroom beside a family attorney and several executives. Tall. Impeccably dressed. The kind of man who never seemed surprised by anything. I had met him only a handful of times over the years through Madison. Brief introductions. Holiday gatherings. Casual greetings. Nothing memorable. At least that was what I believed. Yet the second his eyes found mine across the room, a strange silence settled inside my chest. He looked as if he had been waiting for me. I immediately dismissed the thought. Men like Nathaniel Hayes did not wait for women like me. A hand suddenly grabbed my arm. Madison appeared beside me wearing a beautiful emerald dress and an expression that looked unusually nervous. "Claire," she whispered. "Thank goodness you are here." I laughed. "You invited me." "Right." She swallowed. "Listen, there is something I need to explain." Before she could continue, the music stopped. Every conversation died instantly. The attorney stepped forward. Guests turned toward the center of the ballroom. Confused, I followed their gaze. Nathaniel had moved. He was walking directly toward me. My heartbeat accelerated. Madison looked ready to faint. "Madison," I said carefully, "what exactly is happening?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Nathaniel stopped only a few feet away. The room became impossibly quiet. Hundreds of eyes focused on us. The attorney unfolded a document. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then Nathaniel spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, certain. "Claire Morgan." I stared at him. Yes. The faintest hint of emotion appeared in his eyes. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Something deeper. Something that looked like relief. Then he said the words that shattered my entire evening. "You are about to become my wife." For a moment, I was convinced I had heard him incorrectly. The ballroom disappeared. The music, the guests, the glittering chandeliers above us. Everything blurred into silence. Only one sentence remained. "You are about to become my wife." I stared at Nathaniel Hayes as if he had suddenly started speaking another language. What? It was the only word I could manage. Around us, nobody seemed surprised. That was the terrifying part. The attorney looked calm. The executives looked calm. Even several members of the Hayes family appeared to know exactly what was happening. Everyone except me. My eyes immediately found Madison. My best friend looked guilty enough to confess to a crime. "Madison," I said. Her shoulders sagged. "Claire, I can explain." "Then start explaining." Nathaniel raised a hand slightly. The gesture was small, but the entire room seemed to respond to it. The attorney stepped forward and handed him a folder. I felt my pulse climbing higher with every passing second. Nathaniel accepted the folder and looked directly at me. Not through me. Not around me. At me. This should have been explained privately, he said calmly. Then why was it not? The question escaped before I could stop it. A flicker of something crossed his expression. Regret, perhaps. Because events moved faster than expected. That is not an answer. I know. The attorney opened the folder. Pages of legal documents appeared beneath the ballroom lights. Expensive paper. Official seals. Signatures. The sight made my stomach tighten. What is this? I asked. Nathaniel did not look away. A legal matter involving your family. Every instinct inside me immediately activated. My family. Specifically your stepfather. The room suddenly felt colder. I had not spoken to my stepfather in nearly a year. Avoiding him had become one of the healthiest decisions I had ever made. What does he have to do with this? Nathaniel exchanged a brief glance with the attorney. Then he handed me several pages. I skimmed the first paragraph. The second. The third. My confusion slowly transformed into disbelief. Financial agreements. Loans. Guarantees. Clauses. Legal obligations. My name appeared multiple times. So did my address. My hands began to shake. This is impossible. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. I wish it were. I flipped through the documents again. I never signed any of this. You did not. Then why is my name here? Nobody answered immediately. The silence felt louder than any response could have been. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. Because your stepfather used a family trust connected to your mother's estate. My heart dropped. No. Claire. No. The attorney stepped forward carefully. Miss Morgan, several months ago a series of financial decisions placed portions of that trust at risk. I looked between them. What exactly are you saying? Nathaniel answered himself. I am saying that unless immediate legal protection is established, creditors can pursue assets connected to the trust. I do not have assets. Your apartment. My stomach twisted. Your savings. My pulse accelerated. Your future earnings. Suddenly, I understood why everyone was looking at me. Why the attorney was present. Why Madison looked terrified. This was not a party. It was an intervention. And marriage fixes this? I asked sharply. Nathaniel's eyes never left mine. Marriage to me does. The room fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the ballroom windows, Chicago glittered beneath the night sky. Inside, my entire life seemed to be changing without my permission. I looked at Nathaniel, the billionaire CEO, the most powerful man I had ever met. And for the first time in my life, I realized he was not asking a question. He was offering the only lifeline standing between me and a disaster I never knew was coming. I should have walked out. Every reasonable part of my brain was screaming exactly that. Leave the mansion. Call a lawyer. Find another solution. Do anything except stand in the middle of a ballroom while a billionaire CEO calmly discussed marriage, as if he were scheduling a board meeting. Yet my feet refused to move. Maybe because the documents in my hands felt real. Maybe because the fear in Madison's eyes felt real. Or maybe because Nathaniel Hayes did not look like a man playing games. He looked like a man carrying information he wished he did not have. The attorney quietly gathered several guests and guided them toward another room. Conversation slowly resumed around us, though I could still feel curious glances following every movement. Madison grabbed my hand the second we were alone. Claire, please do not hate me. That depends entirely on what happens next. She winced. Fair. I turned toward Nathaniel. How long have you known about this? Several weeks. My jaw tightened. Several weeks. I wanted more time. For what? His expression remained calm. To find another solution. That answer caught me off guard. I had expected confidence. Certainty. Instead, he sounded frustrated. Almost disappointed. And this was the best solution? I asked. No. His answer came immediately. It was the only solution that guaranteed protection. Silence settled between us. I hated that part of me believed him. Nathaniel gestured toward a quieter sitting room overlooking the estate gardens. Please. Reluctantly, I followed. Madison came with us. The room felt smaller than the ballroom, but no less luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked illuminated fountains. Shelves filled with leather-bound books lined the walls. A fire crackled softly in a stone fireplace despite the warm spring evening. Everything about the room reflected control, precision, wealth. Nathaniel waited until the door closed before speaking again. Claire, I understand how this looks. I laughed once. Do you? Yes. Because from where I am standing, it looks completely insane. Madison covered her face with one hand. Nathaniel remained remarkably composed. You think I am using my position to force you into a marriage? Are you not? For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Hurt. The emotion vanished almost immediately. No. The answer was quiet. Certain. Then explain it. He walked toward a nearby table and picked up another folder. My patience was rapidly disappearing. Apparently he noticed because he opened it immediately. The financial claims connected to your stepfather become active in 30 days. He placed several pages before me. Without intervention, legal proceedings begin. My stomach tightened. And marriage changes that. Marriage places your assets and identity under protections that cannot be challenged during ongoing review. I rubbed my temples. None of this felt real. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment. I worried about grocery prices and utility bills. Suddenly, I was discussing legal shields with one of the richest men in America. Nathaniel studied me carefully. Claire. I looked up. What? His gaze held mine. Steady. Unwavering. I am not asking you to trust me tonight. The room fell silent. Then what are you asking? Something unexpected softened his expression. I am asking you to let me help. The words should not have affected me. Yet they did. Because for the first time all evening, Nathaniel Hayes sounded less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man who had already made a decision long before I arrived at the mansion. And somehow, that realization frightened me even more than the marriage itself. The drive home felt unreal. Chicago blurred beyond the car windows in streaks of white and gold while my thoughts spun faster than the traffic around us. Nathaniel had insisted on having a driver take me home. I had argued for exactly 30 seconds before realizing exhaustion was winning the battle. By the time I reached my apartment building, it was nearly midnight. I expected relief the moment I stepped inside. Instead, the silence felt heavier than ever. I dropped my purse onto the kitchen counter and stared at the stack of unopened mail waiting beside the sink. Utility bills, credit card statements, grocery receipts. The familiar pieces of my ordinary life suddenly seemed fragile. 1 month ago, I would have worried about rent increases and overtime hours. Tonight, I was apparently the center of a legal crisis involving trusts, attorneys, and one of the wealthiest families in America. I slept badly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathaniel standing beneath the chandeliers. Calm. Certain. Watching me as if the outcome of this situation mattered more to him than anyone else in the room. By morning, I convinced myself I needed facts instead of emotions. I called in sick to work for the first time in almost a year, and scheduled a meeting with an independent attorney recommended by a coworker. 3 hours later, I sat across from a gray-haired lawyer in a modest downtown office. I handed him copies of the documents Nathaniel had provided. He spent nearly 40 minutes reading. The longer he remained silent, the more nervous I became. Finally, he removed his glasses and looked directly at me. Miss Morgan, these documents are legitimate. My stomach tightened. So this is real? Very real. I looked down at my hands. And the marriage solution? He hesitated. Legally speaking, it would provide immediate protection. I closed my eyes briefly. Hearing it from Nathaniel was one thing. Hearing it from a stranger was something else entirely. Would you recommend it? The attorney leaned back thoughtfully. I would recommend resolving the financial exposure as quickly as possible. Not exactly an answer. Yet somehow it told me everything I needed to know. When I left the office, a cold wind swept through downtown Chicago. I pulled my coat tighter, and began walking without a destination. My phone buzzed. A text message appeared. Nathaniel, I hope the meeting went well. I stared at the screen. No pressure. No demands. No questions about my decision. Just concern. Before I could reply, another message arrived. There is something else you should know. My pulse quickened immediately. A moment later, a photograph appeared. I stopped walking. The image showed a file dated 10 years earlier. Attached to it was a scholarship application. My scholarship application. The one that helped me finish college when I thought I would have to drop out. Confused, I zoomed in. At the bottom of the page was a signature. Not the foundation director. Not a university official. Nathaniel Hayes. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Another message followed. There are things I should have told you a long time ago. The city noise seemed to disappear around me. 10 years. Somehow, the story I thought had begun last night was suddenly becoming much older than I ever imagined. For the next 24 hours, I carried that photograph everywhere. On my phone. In my thoughts. In every question I could not answer. I stared at the signature so many times that I began noticing details I had missed before. The date. The foundation name. The approval stamp. Everything was real. 10 years ago, when I was 18 and terrified that I would have to leave college because I could not afford tuition, Nathaniel Hayes had somehow been involved. The realization followed me through every hour of the day. By evening, curiosity had completely defeated common sense. I sent a single message. We need to talk. His reply arrived less than 30 seconds later. Name the place. That response alone annoyed me. Nobody should be that efficient. An hour later, I walked into a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. It was elegant without being intimidating. Large windows faced the water. Soft lighting reflected across. Polished wood tables. The kind of place where people spoke quietly and stayed longer than they planned. Nathaniel was already there. Of course he was. He stood when I approached. Claire. I placed my phone on the table and opened the photograph immediately. Start talking. A faint smile appeared. Good evening to you too. Nathaniel. The smile disappeared. He nodded once. Fair. I sat down and slid the image toward him. Why is your signature on my scholarship file? For a moment he simply looked at the photograph. His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. Almost nostalgic. Because I approved it. The honesty caught me off guard. No excuses. No attempt to avoid the question. Just the truth. Why? I asked. Nathaniel looked out toward the lake. The city lights reflected across the dark water beyond the glass. Do you remember Madison's charity event during your senior year of high school? I frowned. Slowly memories returned. A fundraising event. Volunteers. Crowded hallways. Madison crying in a storage room after a public embarrassment that felt catastrophic at 17. My eyes widened. You were there. Yes. I stared at him. I never saw you. You were not looking for me. That was true. Back then, Nathaniel had already been successful, but he spent most of the evening speaking with donors and board members. I had been focused entirely on helping my best friend. What does that have to do with my scholarship? Nathaniel folded his hands. I watched you spend 3 hours fixing a problem that was not yours. I blinked. What? Everyone else disappeared when things became inconvenient. His eyes found mine. You stayed. The word sounded strangely familiar. Suddenly, I remembered another conversation. Another moment years later, when he told me something similar. My chest tightened. Nathaniel continued quietly. After that night, I asked Madison about you. Why? For the first time since I had known him, the billionaire CEO looked almost uncomfortable. The sight was astonishing. Because I wanted to know more. Silence settled between us. Warm. Heavy. Dangerous. I stared at him while pieces of the puzzle slowly shifted into place. The scholarship. The legal protection. The impossible marriage proposal. None of it felt random anymore. Nathaniel. My voice sounded softer now. Exactly how long have you been paying attention to me? His gaze never left mine. The answer came quietly. Almost reluctantly. 10 years. For several seconds, I forgot how to breathe. 10 years. The number echoed through my mind while the city lights shimmered beyond the restaurant windows. 10 years of scholarships, opportunities, chance encounters, and invisible acts of kindness suddenly looked very different. I stared at Nathaniel across the table and searched for some sign that he was exaggerating. I found none. He sat there quietly, waiting for my reaction with a patience that somehow made everything feel even more real. 10 years, I repeated. My voice sounded distant. You have been watching my life for 10 years. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. Not watching. That sounds like a very important distinction. A faint smile appeared. It is. He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. I respected your life too much to interfere with it. I almost laughed. Nathaniel, you approved my scholarship. When you earned it. You helped create opportunities. Opportunities you still had to achieve yourself. His answers came calmly, carefully, as though he had spent years thinking about every word. The realization unsettled me, not because it felt threatening, because it felt personal, deeply personal. Why did you never say anything? I asked. The question lingered between us. Outside, a boat moved slowly across the dark water. Reflections danced across the glass behind him. Nathaniel leaned back slightly in his chair. Because I was 30 years old when I first met you. My heart skipped. And I was 18. He nodded once. Exactly. Silence settled over the table. Suddenly I understood. For the first time since this conversation began, everything made sense. The distance. The restraint. The years of silence. Nathaniel continued quietly. You deserved the freedom to become whoever you wanted to become without someone like me influencing the outcome. His gaze never left mine. So I stayed. Away. I looked down at my hands. Part of me wanted to argue. Another part respected him more than ever. Most powerful men were accustomed to taking what they wanted. Nathaniel had apparently spent a decade doing the opposite. Madison knew? I asked softly. He smiled. A genuine smile this time. Eventually. I groaned. I am never going to hear the end of this. The laugh that escaped him felt warm. Human. Not the polished public version of Nathaniel Hayes. The real one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his expression became serious again. Claire, there is something else. My pulse immediately accelerated. There is always something else. He accepted that criticism with remarkable grace. Fair. Reaching into his jacket, he removed a thin folder and placed it on the table. I eyed it suspiciously. Should I be worried? No. That answer has not been reliable recently. Another smile flickered. Then he pushed the folder toward me. Slowly I opened it. Inside were legal documents. Not financial records this time. Not trust agreements. Marriage contracts. Conditions. Terms. My eyes moved across the pages. Separate finances. Separate residences if requested. Full freedom regarding employment. No restrictions on personal decisions. Every concern I had voiced since the night at the mansion seemed addressed. I looked up in disbelief. Nathaniel watched me carefully. You already prepared all of this? Yes. Before speaking to me? Yes. I stared at him. You expected me to say no. Something softened in his expression. I expected you to protect yourself. For some reason, that answer affected me more than anything else he had said. Because suddenly I realized the proposed marriage had never been about control. It had always been about protection. And somewhere between the scholarship, the hidden support, and the impossible patience of the man sitting across from me, I felt the first crack appear in the wall I had built around my heart. 3 days later, I found myself standing in the lobby of Hayes Global with a visitor badge clipped to my jacket. The marble floors gleamed beneath towering glass walls. Executives crossed the lobby carrying tablets and briefcases. Everything moved with purpose. Everything felt expensive. Yet somehow, I no longer felt completely out of place. Not because I belonged there. Because I was beginning to understand the man who did. Nathaniel had invited me to review the final legal arrangements before any decision was made. No pressure. No deadlines. No ultimatums. Just information. That alone made me trust him more than I wanted to admit. An assistant escorted me to the top floor. The elevator doors opened directly into a private conference suite overlooking Chicago. Sunlight flooded the room. Lake Michigan shimmered in the distance. Nathaniel stood beside the windows speaking with several attorneys. The moment he saw me, the meeting stopped. Not paused. Stopped. His attention shifted entirely toward me. Claire. The simple greeting somehow felt personal. Familiar. Dangerous. One of the attorneys placed a folder on the table. Miss Morgan, these are the final documents. I sat down and began reading. Every clause reflected the same thing. Protection. Independence. Choice. The marriage agreement gave me more freedom than most employment contracts. Halfway through the review, the conference room doors opened unexpectedly. A man entered without waiting for permission. My stomach dropped immediately. My stepfather. The room became silent. He looked older than I remembered. More tired. Yet the confidence in his expression remained unchanged. Claire. Hearing my name and his voice instantly transported me back years. Arguments. Excuses. Promises that never lasted. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself beside me without saying a word. Not in front of me. Beside me. The difference mattered. You should not be here, one attorney said firmly. My stepfather ignored him. His attention remained fixed on me. We need to talk. Old fear tried to return. For one brief moment, it almost succeeded. Then I remembered where I was. I remembered who I had become. Most importantly, I remembered that I no longer needed anyone else to speak for me. I stood slowly. No, I said calmly. His expression shifted. Surprise. He had not expected resistance. Claire, you do not understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. The room remained silent. Every attorney watched. Every executive listened. Nathaniel said nothing. He simply stayed beside me, allowing me to own my voice. My stepfather glanced toward the legal documents. You are making a mistake. I met his gaze. No. The mistake happened when you used my future to solve your problems. For the first time, he had no response. The silence stretched between us. Then one of the attorneys approached and politely guided him toward the door. No argument followed. No dramática enfrentación. Just consequences. The doors closed. The room exhaled collectively. I realized my hands were shaking slightly. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Are you okay? The concern in his voice felt genuine. I nodded. Yes. And for the first time it was true. Because the fear that had followed me for years suddenly felt smaller. Weaker. As the meeting resumed, I looked down at the documents one final time. Then I signed my name. Not because I was trapped. Not because I had no choice. Because somewhere along the way, the impossible proposal had transformed into something else entirely. Something built on trust. And when I looked up, Nathaniel was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. Relief. As if the decision that changed my future had also saved something inside him. The wedding itself happened 2 weeks later. Not because Nathaniel rushed me. Quite the opposite. If anything, he seemed determined to give me every possible opportunity to change my mind. The ceremony was small. Private. No magazine photographers. No television cameras. No extravagant spectacle designed to impress strangers. Just family, a handful of close friends, and the people who genuinely mattered. Madison cried before the ceremony even started. I suspected she had been waiting 10 years for this moment too. Standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of a lakeside estate, I looked out across the water and tried to understand how my life had changed so completely. A month earlier, I had been worried about overdue bills and apartment repairs. Now I was holding a bouquet, while preparing to marry the most powerful man I had ever known. The transition should have felt impossible. Somehow it did not. Because the more I learned about Nathaniel, the less he resembled the billionaire described in headlines. The public saw a CEO. I saw a man who remembered my favorite author from a conversation 10 years earlier. A man who quietly funded scholarships because he believed opportunities should belong to people willing to work for them. A man who had spent years protecting my freedom instead of demanding my attention. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotions. Warm sunlight. Soft music. The scent of fresh flowers drifting through the room. Nathaniel stood across from me looking unusually nervous. The sight almost made me smile. Nobody else seemed to notice. Everyone saw confidence. I saw the slight tension in his shoulders. The careful way he folded his hands. The relief that appeared every time our eyes met. When the ceremony ended, applause filled the room. Madison immediately threw her arms around me. Several members of the Hayes family followed. Yet throughout all of it, Nathaniel remained strangely quiet. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the celebrations had ended, we found ourselves alone on a terrace overlooking the lake. The sky glowed with the final colors of sunset. Orange, gold, deep blue. The world felt suspended between day and night. Nathaniel rested his arms on the stone railing. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Then he laughed softly. I should probably tell you something. I glanced toward him. That sentence has never led anywhere normal. The smile that followed was brief, thoughtful, fair. He reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. Immediately I groaned. More documents? No. Thank goodness. He handed it to me. The paper felt old, carefully folded, worn around the edges. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet covered in handwriting. His handwriting. My eyes moved to the date. 10 years earlier. My heart stopped. Slowly I began reading. It was not a business note. Not a contract. Not a legal record. It was a letter. A letter Nathaniel had written after meeting me at Madison's charity event. All those years ago. He had never intended to send it. The words were simple, honest, unexpectedly vulnerable. He wrote about seeing someone choose kindness when nobody was watching. About watching me help others without expecting recognition. About the strange certainty that some people changed a room simply by entering it. My vision blurred slightly as I reached the final line. I folded the letter carefully and looked up. Nathaniel was watching me, waiting. You kept this for 10 years? I asked quietly. He nodded once. The sunset reflected in his eyes. I kept you in my heart for 10 years too. For a moment, the world became completely still. The lake, the sunset, the distant lights beginning to appear along the shoreline. Everything faded behind the words he had just spoken. I kept you in my heart for 10 years too. No billionaire headline had ever prepared me for this version of Nathaniel Hayes. The man the world admired built companies. The man standing beside me built patience. 10 years of it. I looked down at the letter again. The paper had aged. The ink had softened slightly. Yet every word remained. A record of feelings he never expected me to read. Feelings he never tried to use to influence me. That realization mattered most. Nathaniel had possessed every advantage in the world. Wealth, influence, power, connections. Yet the one thing he wanted, he had never tried to force. He had simply waited. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. You could have told me. My voice sounded softer than intended. Nathaniel smiled faintly. Many times. I laughed through the emotion gathering in my throat. And he looked toward the water. Every time I decided your happiness mattered more than my feelings. The honesty nearly broke me. Because suddenly I understood something I had missed from the beginning. The marriage proposal had never been the first move in a plan. It had been the last option available to a man who had spent years protecting my freedom. The legal crisis had forced him into the open. Fate had simply removed his hiding place. The evening breeze drifted across the terrace. Somewhere inside the estate, I could hear distant laughter from family members finishing the celebration. Life continued around us. Yet the moment felt suspended in time. Nathaniel. He turned toward me immediately. Yes. I smiled. You know what the funniest part is? Genuine curiosity appeared in his expression. What? I stepped closer. For someone who runs a billion-dollar company, your strategy was terrible. His laughter echoed across the terrace. Warm. Unrestrained. Real. I suspected that. 10 years. I shook my head. 10 years. He accepted the criticism with surprising grace. Then his expression softened. I would have waited longer. The answer carried no drama. No performance. Just truth. My eyes burned unexpectedly. Not from sadness. From the overwhelming realization that some people spend their entire lives searching for someone who chooses them completely. Somehow, without noticing, I had been chosen years ago. The city lights reflected across the water as night settled around us. I reached for his hand. This time there were no contracts. No eternis. No legal obligations. Just a simple choice. His fingers closed gently around mine. Comfortable. Familiar. Home. Together we stood overlooking the lake, while the first stars appeared above the horizon. The future remained uncertain. Life always was. There would be challenges neither of us could predict. New responsibilities. New mistakes. New lessons. But for the first time, uncertainty did not feel frightening. Because I would not be facing it alone. Nathaniel squeezed my hand lightly. I glanced toward him and smiled. 10 years earlier, he had written a letter he never intended to send. 10 years later, fate finally delivered it. And standing beside the man who had quietly loved me through every version of myself, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest love stories do not begin with grand declarations. Sometimes they begin with patience, with kindness, with a person who chooses you long before they ever expect to be chosen back. And in the end, that made all the difference.